Hey, I'm Asher, and welcome back to the Filmcast. Today I'll be reading part 6 of my MonsterVerse continuation series, Destroy All Monsters. Now, before I get into this, I want to say a few things. First, this will be the end of my MonsterVerse series. This is it. Everything has built up to this story. Everything will end here, and there will be no more MonsterVerse stories after this. Also, I want to note that there are several graphic moments in the story, and a few instances where I use strong language, so if you wish to not hear them, I insist you leave. With that out of the way, let's get into Destroy All Monsters. The movie starts with Nick sleeping in his assigned room, only to be woken up by an alarm. Nick gets up and is confused why the alarm has sounded, so he gets ready and even arms himself with a handgun to go investigate. Nick exits his room to find personnel running for their lives and screaming, much to Nick's confusion. Nick walks around seeing Monarch personnel run for their lives without any reason, and he screams, "What the hell is going on?" Right after screaming this, Nick hears a bang behind him and turns to see a metal door being hit by something. Nick starts backing away from the door and even raises his gun in preparation to fight whatever's on the other side of that door. The door breaks down, and on the other side, a horrific crustacean monster is unveiled. These crustaceans are creatures around 6 feet tall with horned crested heads and are red in color. These creatures also have 6 legs and have a tail with blades sticking from the end. The monster roars at Nick. And in fear, Nick begins running for his life as the creature gives chase. Nick runs through the outpost intending to find the others, mainly Audrey, and then escape the outpost. Nick doesn't exactly know where he's going though, because he's never stayed at Outpost 95 before, so he doesn't know its layout. As Nick searches for everyone, he comes face to face with a crustacean and opens fire at it with his handgun, but the bullets have almost no effect. Nick continues running while getting chased, just hoping to find his mom and make sure she and everyone else is okay. During Nick's search, he finds an assault rifle on a dead soldier, takes it, and continues looking for everyone. Nick soon realizes that there's more than one crustacean, which he discovers when he enters a room and finds 5 crustaceans feeding on the remains of Monarch personnel. Nick eventually makes his way to the cafeteria and tries to exit the other door, only to find it locked. He turns around to see a crustacean standing in the doorway to the entrance, blocking his only way out. Nick raises his assault rifle and fires an entire magazine at it, but this, just like the handgun, has only little effect on the creature. Nick then tries to use the grenade launcher on the gun, but the crustacean charges at him, but he manages to dodge it. Nick tries to make his way to the exit, but the crustacean uses its tail to whack Nick into a wall. The crustacean starts crawling towards Nick, but he manages to raise his gun and fires the grenade, which causes the crustacean to fall on its back. Nick breathes a sigh of relief, thinking he finished off the crustacean, but it gets back up and starts crawling towards Nick with the intent to kill him. The crustacean pins Nick to the ground and tries to strike him with its second mouth. The crustaceans have a second mouth inside of their main mouth, similar to a xenomorph from the Alien franchise. Nick blocks the first 2 strikes with his now empty gun, and when the crustacean goes in for a third strike, a fire axe flies in and hits the crustacean in its second mouth. The crustacean falls back, gets kicked to the ground, and after a few good swings from the fire axe, the crustacean's head gets chopped off. Nick looks up to see the axe wielder to be Audrey, who has been looking for Nick, much to his relief. Nick gets up and the two embrace in their reunion. Audrey then leads Nick to a room where everyone else has been holding up. Nick loudly asks what the crustaceans are, to which everyone says they have no idea. Mark informs all the survivors that an SOS was sent out and that ospreys are flying in to evacuate everyone. Madison asks how they will deal with the creatures, to which Mark says that explosive charges are being set, which will destroy the outpost and hopefully the creatures before they can multiply out of control. All the personnel hold out until the ospreys arrive and they make their way outside the outpost and everyone starts getting loaded on. As everyone starts getting loaded onto the ospreys, a soldier comes out and says that they need help setting the last of the charges, and that most of his team was wiped out by the ever-growing number of crustaceans. Audrey, along with a few others, volunteer to go back in and help set the charges. Nick, not wanting to just leave his mom, arms himself with an automatic shotgun and decides to go too. The group sneaks their way inside, and the remaining soldiers go in and set the explosives. Audrey is given the detonator and told to rig it so it will detonate the bombs once everything is ready and they safely get away. Things start to go wrong when a group of crustaceans ambush the remaining soldiers inside the outpost by jumping out from the ceiling and completely massacre all but one. The last wounded soldier attempts to make his way to the room Nick and Audrey are in, but collapses in front of the door. Nick and Audrey see him and attempt to help him, but he closes the door with the intention of buying them time. The last soldier grabs his gun and fires it at the crustaceans, but he is ultimately overwhelmed. Nick and Audrey realize that they need to hurry before they too get overwhelmed, and Audrey makes the final adjustments to setting the detonator. Nick meanwhile guards Audrey and watches all the doors for more crustaceans that are heading their way. However, just as Audrey finishes setting up the detonator, she hears a sound behind her. Nick hears a slicing sound and turns around to see Audrey staring at him with a blade through her stomach. The blade is the sharp end of a crustacean's tail. Audrey looks at him with a disheartened expression, and she mutters, "Nick?" and then collapses to the floor as the blade pulls out of her stomach. Nick screams, "Mom!" but gets confronted by a crustacean that drops from the ceiling when he tries to run to her. The crustacean charges at Nick as he raises his gun, but the crustacean bites down on the barrel of the gun. Nick fires his gun and severely weakens the crustacean, causing it to fall to the ground. In a fit of rage and sadness, Nick jams the gun into the crustacean's eye and fires all of his remaining ammunition, which kills it. Nick drops his gun and runs at Audrey, who is still alive but bleeding heavily. Nick grabs her by the shoulders and attempts to carry her but can only get so far before collapsing. Nick once again tries to pick her up but fails from exhaustion, and Audrey tells Nick to leave her behind and run to safety. Nick first completely ignores her request, not wanting to leave her behind, but eventually he can carry her no further. Audrey once again asks Nick to leave her behind so she can detonate the charges to ensure that the crustaceans don't escape. Nick rejects this again, stating that he's already lost his dad and doesn't want to lose his mom too. Nick begins to tear up, but Audrey gives him a hug and tells him that she's not only proud of what he's grown up to be, but tells him that he's the best son that she and his dad could have ever asked for. After a final "I love you," Nick, with a face full of tears, makes his escape as the crustaceans are about to break into the room that a severely wounded Audrey is laying in. Nick makes it out of the outpost just as the Ospreys are about to take off and makes his way onto one. He gets in and sits by himself, crying. When asked where Audrey was, he doesn't respond. When the survivors realize what happened to Audrey, they decide to leave before the crustaceans break out of the outpost. Back in the outpost, a horde of crustaceans break in and begin approaching Audrey with murderous intent. Audrey reaches for the detonator and manages to grab it, but a crustacean stabs Audrey through the chest and lifts her up. The crustacean roars at her. And in response, Audrey yells, "Yeah, you too!" and triggers the detonator. The explosives begin going off across the outpost, destroying everything in their path. When Audrey and the crustaceans notice a huge flow of flames rushing towards them, Audrey closes her eyes and sheds a single tear as she gets consumed by the flames. Back in the air, Nick hears the sounds of the outpost blowing up and buries his face in his hands, utterly devastated and heartbroken by the loss of his mother. Eileen Chen, who was a good friend of Nick and Audrey, goes over to try to comfort Nick, but he keeps to himself. Back at the ruins of what was once Outpost 95, everything is silent until a rumble starts. Suddenly, a large pair of spike-pointed arms rise from the ashes and spike into the ground. The arms pull up a larger version of the 6-foot crustaceans from the remains. These versions, called aggregates, are similar in appearance to the smaller versions, but have spike-pointed arms protruding from their back and are 40 feet tall. A few aggregates rise up and are joined by a large number of smaller crustaceans, and the leading aggregate roars in the air. The Ospreys arrive at Castle Bravo, and as everyone gets off, Nick walks ahead and makes his way into a room that he locks himself inside of. No one tries to stop him because they know to give him time alone, so they make everyone else regroup in the command center. Everyone mourns the loss of Audrey. They talk about how nice of a person she was, and even make plans to set up a funeral for her. Their plans are cut short when an alarm is sounded, and the base gets reports of crustacean-like creatures attacking people. The personnel realizes some of the crustaceans survived the destruction of Outpost 95. Everyone starts coming up with plans to deal with the crustaceans, but talk quietly because they don't want Nick to hear them and learn that the crustaceans survived. Back in his room, Nick is sitting on the side of a bed and is watching videos on his phone of himself and Audrey and some with his dad, Steve. Nick soon receives a news notification. He checks it and finds that it is talking about reports of crustaceans and aggregates attacking people. Nick is shocked, sad, but also angry that the creatures are still alive, but then gets an idea. Nick goes through his photos and finds the pictures of the files he took of the projects Alan Jonah and his men were working on when he was in Siberia. He finds the pictures he took of Project D and reads through it to see if he can find any information that talks about the creature's weaknesses. He does find one stating that the creatures are vulnerable to extremely high or low temperatures. Nick gets up to report this to everyone else. In the command center, all the personnel are coming up with ideas on what to do when Nick runs in. Some of the personnel try to tell him about the creatures having survived, but he explains that not only does he already know, but he's found a way to stop them. The personnel realize they can use maser tanks to kill the creatures, and plans are drawn up to corner the creatures and exterminate them. They first find out where the creatures are going and see the ever-growing army of aggregates and crustaceans are making their way to Fukushima. They figure out that the creatures are heading to Fukushima because they are trying to reach the nuclear power plant and absorb the radiation. If the creatures manage to do this, they could grow in size and may even become too big for the maser tanks to be effective against. A plan is made which involves luring the creatures to the power plant, surrounding them with maser tanks, and firing at them until all the aggregates and crustaceans are dead. The scene cuts to a large squadron of ospreys flying towards Fukushima, with everyone on board. Nick once again watches old memories of his family, and a few personnel, including Rick, Jen, and Mark, express how sad they are about the death of Audrey, but Nick only responds by saying that Audrey will be avenged and that her death will not be in vain. The pilot informs everyone that they have reached Fukushima, and they receive a transmission from the maser tanks that they are passing through the city. Everyone is disheartened when they hear that the maser tanks have come across the bodies of civilians, police, and military personnel lying dead through the streets. This is because when the aggregates entered Fukushima, they killed all the people that got in their way. Police and military personnel tried to fight them off while civilians tried to get to safety, but the police and military personnel were overrun by the crustaceans and aggregates. What followed was the crustaceans and aggregates catching the crowds of people running from them and completely massacring them. The ospreys land near the power plant as the creatures begin making their way inside of it. The maser tanks arrive and completely surround the power plant. Most of the creatures enter the power plant, but a few stand out and attempt to attack the tanks. The tanks fire their lasers at the creatures, and the beams cause the crustaceans to explode. A few more crustaceans emerge from the power plant, but the tanks fire and kill them too, while the remaining others retreat back into the power plant, where all the rest are. The tanks are ordered to bombard the base, which they do, and Nick starts getting happy as it seems that the creatures are doomed and will all be wiped out. This is exactly what Nick wants to see, since the creatures are responsible for his mother's death, and all he wants is revenge against them. Meanwhile, inside the power plant, the creatures start absorbing all the energy from the spent fuel pools, which is where all the radiation is stored. The creatures start growing in size, but then they form arms and start assimilating with each other, as if they're trying to combine into something bigger. As all the Monarch personnel watch the bombardment of the power plant, they notice that the power plant is starting to glow red. They soon realize that the power plant is about to explode. Everyone attempts to get to safety, but it's too late, and the power plant explodes. The explosion is so strong that it throws back all the personnel. Nick is the first to get up and sees the power plant engulfed in a huge wall of flame. Nick suddenly hears a sound that sounds like one of the crustaceans, and he grabs an assault rifle and runs into the flames to finish off what he believes is the last crustacean. Nick looks around while still hearing the sound and eventually starts screaming at the crustacean to come out and fight him. As Nick continues looking, a second explosion occurs, which causes Nick to turn away because of the bright flash from the blast. The explosion destroys much of the remaining structure of the power plant, but the explosion also reveals a shape in the flame. The shape in the flame unveils itself to be a living creature. Standing 500 feet tall, a monster unlike any other shows itself to the world. This monster is bipedal and it has two arms unlike the crustaceans and aggregates. It has a crested head like the crustaceans and also has terrifying wings. This being has a yellow horn protruding from its forehead and a tail similar in design to that of the crustaceans, just longer and bigger. This monster has an almost hellish appearance. It looks like it just rose from the deepest and darkest pits of hell, making it one of the most terrifying beings to ever set foot on Earth. Nick looks up to see this monster and is stunned to see the creature towering above him. Nick is so terrified he drops his gun and starts backing away, only to fall on his back. The creature opens its eyes and lets out a terrifying, almost demonic roar into the air, causing Nick to start running for his life. Back with the other Monarch personnel, Mark checks on Madison and the others to see if they're okay, but they stop when they hear a roar in the distance. They also hear what sounds like a muffled scream. Mark then notices Nick running to them screaming something. When he gets closer, Mark realizes that Nick is screaming, "Run!" Everyone looks up to see the creature Nick is running from, and they too start running. They run to the ospreys that drop them off and demand them to begin takeoff, while the remaining maser tanks start firing at the monster. The creature takes 2 steps from its original position, as if it's learning how to walk with 2 legs, lets out another roar. And then comes under fire from the maser tanks. The tanks, however, do no damage, and the monster destroys them all. As everyone gets on the ospreys, one of them calls for support from the Argo and a Monarch jet squadron. Nick, Mark, Madison, Chen, and Rick all board an osprey, while Sam and a few others board another. The creature watches as the ospreys fly off and starts charging up for something. Everyone looks on as the creature charges and realizes that the creature is about to fire a beam at them. The pilots attempt to evade, but their move comes just too soon, and the creature fires its beam at the squadron, shooting down 2 of the Ospreys. The monster then uses its wings to take flight and starts chasing the squadron. The squadron starts flying faster in an attempt to escape the creature and reach the Argo before the monster catches them. The monster catches up but gets intercepted by fighter jets, which lure it away from the Ospreys as the Argo arrives. The Argo makes plans to fly a safer distance and load Ospreys onto it as the jets distract the monster. The first Osprey to get loaded on the Argo is the one Nick, Mark, Madison, Chen, and Rick are on, and the group makes their way to the command section of the Argo. One of the military personnel attempts to contact the jets to get a status on how well they're holding off the monster, but gets no response. Everyone gets confused of where the jets are, but they get their answer when an Osprey flying next to the Argo gets downed by what seems to be a fireball that fell from the sky. Everyone looks up to see flaming jets falling from the sky. The monster engaged the jets, and without even breaking a sweat, completely decimated the whole squadron. The Ospreys and the Argo pull evasive maneuvers to avoid the jets, but some Ospreys are still downed, and one of the jets even crashes into the right wing of the Argo. The Argo is damaged, but still operational, and continues to fly off. Sam's Osprey flies up to be picked up by the Argo, but everyone hears a noise from above, and the monster flies down and hits Sam's Osprey to the ground, killing everyone inside, including Sam. The monster then completely destroys all the other Ospreys and sets its eyes on the Argo. The Argo goes at maximum speed to escape the creature, but the monster manages to catch up and reaches its hand out to grab the Argo. Everyone watches as the monster's hand gets closer and closer, so they brace for impact, but Nick notices a blue light from behind the monster. A blue beam strikes the monster in the back, causing it to plummet to the ground. As the monster falls, the Argo takes the opportunity to fly off and head back to Castle Bravo. The monster crashes into the ground and looks to see where the beam came from and sees Godzilla, and the 2 monsters are rather surprised to see each other. Godzilla is surprised because he's never seen this monster before, and the monster is surprised because it never knew there were other titans like it on Earth. The 2 creatures engage in a brutal fight, with the monster overpowering and wounding Godzilla. The monster takes Godzilla, flies up, and throws the king into the remainder of Fukushima and flies off. Godzilla gets back up and roars as his new foe flies off. And starts following it with the intent of getting revenge. Back at Castle Bravo, the Argo lands and everyone gets off the ship and enters the outpost. Though everyone is in grief after the loss of Audrey and now Sam, they try to think of what to do now. Nick is asked if the pictures he took show any information of the creatures combining. He looks but sees they do not show anything of that. But what he does see is a name given to the creatures, Destoroyah, which is what the D in Project D stands for. Destoroyah will be referred to as it because Destoroyah is a genderless creature. Monarch does some studies to see if there's anything they can do to defeat Destoroyah, and they find only one weapon in their arsenal that can do anything to Destoroyah. They find that the Absolute Zero cannon inside of Mechagodzilla could possibly defeat Destoroyah, but there are problems with using this gun. As they discuss, Monarch receives a call from Admiral Stenz, who tells them that he's found out about Destoroyah and if there's any way to stop Destoroyah. They explain to Stenz that nuclear weapons won't work, but also warn him not to use oxygen destroyers against Destoroyah. They explain how Destoroyah was mutated by the oxygen destroyer, so using it won't hurt it, but make it stronger. Stenz pauses as he takes in the information, and he tells them that he will order all remaining oxygen destroyers to be destroyed. Just before he signs off of the call, Stenz is told about the Absolute Zero being possibly the only hope of defeating Destoroyah. Back with Destoroyah, it starts going on a rampage against Titans across the planet. Destoroyah's second encounter with a Titan takes place in Antarctica with a Titan named Scylla. Scylla is a giant spider-like monster with 6 legs, a shell on her back, and a head that resembles that of the mythical beast Cthulhu. The 2 monsters begin fighting, but eventually it ends with Destoroyah winning the fight rather easily as Scylla simply doesn't have enough strength to compete. Destoroyah finishes off Scylla by ripping off a few of her legs and then slicing her with its blade horn. One of Destoroyah's powers includes charging up energy in its horn, then using its horn as a blade to slice or cut enemies. Destoroyah flies off and searches for its next target to kill, and its journey takes it on a course to Skull Island. On Skull Island, Zilla shows up and carries a huge amount of fish to the cave that he and Kamadathrax currently reside in. Zilla reaches the mouth of the cave and drops the fish in front of the cave to be greeted by Kamadathrax and another creature, KJ. KJ, or Kamadathrax Jr., is the offspring of Zilla and Kamadathrax. KJ is 1 year old, has the body of Kamadathrax and the spines of Zilla, and is a female. Zilla approaches his daughter, and she gives her father a little lick on the nose, and Kamadathrax gives Zilla a nuzzle, and the family proceed to eat the fish together. On another section of Skull Island, a group of skull crawlers prepare to attack a huge herd of skyr buffalo. The skull crawlers emerge from a tree on land and charge at the herd, only to be stopped after hearing a sound from above. The skull crawlers and skyr buffalo look up to see Destoroyah flying in and landing in front of them. Destoroyah roars at the monsters, causing skyr buffalo and even the skull crawlers, who are supposedly fearless creatures, to flee in a flight of panic. Destoroyah attacks and completely wipes out the buffalo and the skull crawlers, and then goes on a bloody massacre against the inhabiting creatures of Skull Island. Watching the massacre unfold from a distance is Zilla, who falls back to his cave to warn his family, and the trio get in their cave to hide. Once Kamadathrax and KJ are in the cave, Zilla goes back to see how close Destoroyah is to them, and he comes back quickly after seeing Destoroyah getting close. Zilla doesn't try to confront Destoroyah because he knows he is no match for Destoroyah, and any attempt to fight it would be suicidal. So he intends on hiding himself and his family to keep them safe. As the trio hide in their cave, Destoroyah drops from the sky right in front of the cave and starts looking around for any other monsters. Destoroyah keeps searching as Zilla and his family keep quiet in their cave to avoid detection, and eventually, Destoroyah moves on away from the cave. The trio breathe a huge sigh of relief now that Destoroyah is seemingly gone, but just before Zilla slowly leaves the cave to check if it's truly gone, a hand bursts through the cave and grabs Kamadathrax. Outside the cave, Destoroyah pulls Kamadathrax out of the side of the cave and throws her to a mountain. Zilla and KJ run out of the cave as it starts to collapse, and Zilla attempts to get his daughter somewhere safe. Meanwhile, Kamadathrax squares up against Destoroyah and intends to fight it while Zilla gets KJ far away. Kamadathrax jumps on Destoroyah and starts clawing and biting it, but Destoroyah grabs her, throws her to the ground, and blasts her in the chest with a micro-oxygen beam. The blast heavily wounds Kamadathrax, and then Destoroyah fires a beam at the mountain above Kamadathrax, causing rubble to collapse on top of her. Destoroyah then turns its attention to Zilla and KJ, so it flies to chase them. Zilla takes KJ and runs as fast as he can, but Destoroyah catches up and fires at Zilla, causing him to fall to the ground with KJ in his arms. Destoroyah lands next to Zilla and starts hitting him ferociously. KJ runs out and tries to fight Destoroyah to protect her father, but Destoroyah just hits her away. Zilla becomes enraged seeing his daughter being hurt, so he charges up and fires a green atomic breath blast that hits Destoroyah in the face. The blast manages to knock Destoroyah back, but only hurts it a little, but this gives Zilla enough time to get back to his feet, pick up KJ, and continue running off. As the pair run off, Destoroyah recovers from the blast and starts chasing them again. Zilla runs through a forest, but when he gets out of it, he is halted when he gets to the edge of a super deep ravine that is too deep for him to jump across, leaving Zilla and KJ trapped. Destoroyah lands in front of Zilla and KJ and corners the two. Destoroyah tail-whacks Zilla to the ground and intends to push him and KJ into the ravine, but just before it can, Destoroyah hears a sound and turns around to see Kamadathrax jumping at it. Kamadathrax jumps on Destoroyah's torso and bites into its neck. Destoroyah walks backwards and ends up falling into the ravine with Kamadathrax. Zilla gets up and looks down the ravine to see if he can find or hear Kamadathrax, but first hears nothing. The ravine is so deep that Zilla can't see the bottom. Zilla then hears a sound inside the ravine and roars out thinking it's Kamadathrax, but his call is met by a micro-oxygen beam striking him in the face and knocking him down. As Zilla falls, KJ runs up to him to see if he's okay, and the two look up to see Destoroyah fly out of the ravine with a severely wounded Kamadathrax in its hand. Destoroyah first hovers above Zilla and KJ until it charges up its horn and slices open Kamadathrax in the chest and stomach. Kamadathrax screams in pain while Zilla and KJ roar in agony. Destoroyah then throws Kamadathrax over to the two and then flies off. Zilla gets up and immediately goes to check on his mate, with KJ following him. Kamadathrax knows she doesn't have much longer, so with her last life left, she gives KJ a smooth nuzzle on the nose and gives Zilla a love-filled lick on the face. Kamadathrax then rests her head back on the ground, closes her eyes, and dies. Zilla and KJ start to cry at the loss of Kamadathrax, and soon Kong shows up to see the pair. Kong was on the other side of the island when Destoroyah arrived, and Kong was just too late to do anything about Destoroyah. Kong is disheartened by the sight of Zilla and KJ crying over the corpse of Kamadathrax, but becomes distracted by seeing Destoroyah fly off. Kong gets a feeling of anger over him, thinking about getting revenge against Destoroyah for killing almost all life on his island. Destoroyah continues its rampage of destruction and killing across the planet, killing titans such as Methuselah, a titan with 4 legs, tusks around its mouth, and having a tall back that resembles a mountain, and Queen Muto, or Barb, a female titan with 6 legs, red eyes, and pike-like protrusions sticking from her back. Destoroyah's conquest also leads it to setting cities on fire, and soon its journey leads it to arriving outside of Isla de Mara, Mexico. Destoroyah arrives and spots its next target atop a volcano, Rodan. Destoroyah flies in and lands in front of the volcano that Rodan nests in and confronts him. Rodan flies up and prepares for the confrontation. The two beasts fly in the sky and start throwing blows at one another. Rodan flies at Destoroyah and starts clawing at it with his feet claws, and even manages to burn Destoroyah with magma leaking from his wings. Destoroyah, however, gains the advantage when Rodan flaps his wings forward, and Destoroyah manages to grab Rodan's wings. Destoroyah charges up and fires a micro-oxygen beam at Rodan in the chest, which knocks him back. Destoroyah flies forward and grabs Rodan by the neck with its tail and uses it to throw Rodan into the volcano. Rodan crashes into the volcano. Destoroyah then fires another blast at Rodan, but he manages to dodge it. But the beam hits the volcano, causing it to collapse and erupt. As the volcano erupts and spews lava out at a terrifying rate, Rodan falls inside of it. Destoroyah hovers over the city and watches as the lava flowing from the volcano starts moving to the city below it. The lava begins consuming everything, buildings, plants, and even the people of the city. The lava covers everything, effectively turning Isla de Mara into a sea of fire, and Destoroyah just watches this happen as if it is proud of the death and destruction it just caused. Destoroyah flies off to its next target, and after it leaves, Rodan crawls his way out of the lava and looks on to see all of Isla de Mara completely destroyed. Everyone at Castle Bravo watches this chaos unfold and can't do anything about it. When a report is requested, it's revealed that Destoroyah has killed 10 titans and destroyed several major cities, all within a single week. Castle Bravo is then given an update from Outpost 33, and they are told that Mechagodzilla will be ready soon, and everyone decides to board the Argo and travel to the outpost. Everyone gets on, and the Argo begins its travel to Skull Island. As the Argo flies, its radar picks up a large mass in the sky, and everyone gets concerned since they know it's a titan, but are unsure if it's Destoroyah or another titan. The answer is revealed when a beam flies through the clouds and just barely misses the Argo. The beam is followed by Destoroyah flying out of the clouds and beginning to chase the Argo again. Destoroyah swings its hands at the Argo in an attempt to knock it out of the sky, but the Argo manages to evade these attacks. The Argo gets closer to Skull Island, and a plan is made to lose Destoroyah in the clouds and then use Ospreys to transport everyone to Outpost 33. The Argo can't land at Outpost 33 because then Destoroyah will know of the outpost and will destroy it, which will result in the death of all the personnel and even the destruction of Mechagodzilla. The Argo flies in the clouds, and once everyone is aboard the Ospreys, they are dropped from the Argo and make their way to Outpost 33. The Argo then flies up and is spotted by Destoroyah, who once again starts chasing it. Destoroyah charges up and fires a micro-oxygen beam which hits one of the Argo's engines. The Argo, as a last stand, turns around and starts flying towards Destoroyah while firing a salvo of missiles at it. As the two are about to collide, Destoroyah charges up its horn and uses it to completely slice the Argo in half. The Argo comes apart, and Destoroyah watches as the Argo catches fire and crashes into the ocean. Inside Outpost 33, all the personnel try to take a breather after narrowly escaping death again and are shocked at the destruction of the Argo. Destoroyah lands on Skull Island and starts looking around for something. Everyone realizes that Destoroyah is looking for them, but is unsure where they are. As everyone looks on in horror, Nick receives a notification from a computer, which is not yet revealed. Destoroyah's attention changes when it sees what looks like a camera and realizes that everyone is inside the mountain, so it starts punching at the mountain, which sends everyone into a flight of panic. An order is given to evacuate the outpost, and as the group runs, Nick turns away from the group and runs in another direction without everyone else's knowledge. Nick runs into a room and starts dressing in a uniform very frantically. Nick then runs into a large room and upon entry pushes a button and enters an elevator. The elevator reaches the top of something and Nick runs inside what looks like a control room. The room that Nick just entered to get to the elevator goes dark from the lights going out. The room is shrouded in a pitch black screen, but then 2 red lights emerge from the darkness. Back with the others, they make their way to the Ospreys as the outpost begins to collapse. Everyone runs, but Destoroyah notices them and instead of causing the outpost to collapse, turns its attention on the fleeing people. Destoroyah starts stomping on the crowds of people and the remaining Ospreys, and in the chaos, Rick gets crushed by Destoroyah, leaving Mark, Chen, and Madison. The 3 try to get to the last Osprey, but it gets blown up and the explosion throws them back. Chen looks up to see all the Ospreys in flames and all the personnel apart from Mark and Madison dead. She then looks up to see Destoroyah looking down upon her, and then Mark and Madison wake up to see the demonic-looking creature staring down on them. Destoroyah starts charging up, so Mark and Madison hug, thinking their end is now, while Chen closes her eyes, bracing for death. However, just before Destoroyah finishes them off, a metal fist punches Destoroyah in the face and knocks it back. Mark, Madison, and Chen look up to see Mechagodzilla standing in front of them. Earlier, the notification Nick received was an alert stating that Mechagodzilla was ready, and the room Nick entered was the room Mechagodzilla was in. Also, the red dots that appeared in the dark room were Mechagodzilla's eyes lighting up after Mechagodzilla was activated. Destoroyah gets back up and roars at Mechagodzilla, and Mechagodzilla does the same to Destoroyah. Mechagodzilla goes into battle mode immediately since Nick knows this will be a difficult fight. The 2 square up and their fight begins with Mechagodzilla making the first move. Mechagodzilla charges at Destoroyah and Destoroyah fires a micro-oxygen beam at Mechagodzilla, but the Metal King uses its jet boosters to dodge it. Mechagodzilla flies over Destoroyah, and when it lands, it turns around and fires its rainbow beam, which knocks Destoroyah back. Mechagodzilla activates the Orca inside of it, and this causes Destoroyah to scream in pain. Mechagodzilla continues using the Orca and the rainbow beam, and this keeps Destoroyah at bay. Nick thinks he's just defeated Destoroyah, but things start to go wrong when Nick notices Destoroyah's tail. Destoroyah tail whacks Mechagodzilla in the jaw, and as Mechagodzilla recovers from the attack, Destoroyah, in a fit of rage, punches into Mechagodzilla and pulls out the Orca. Destoroyah then raises the Orca in the air and crushes it, much to Nick's horror. Mechagodzilla continues fighting, but Destoroyah overpowers the robot and eventually knocks it back and damages Mechagodzilla with a powerful blast from the micro-oxygen beam. Mechagodzilla pulls out its blades with the intention of fighting a last-stand battle, since Nick realizes he might lose the fight. Destoroyah roars and charges at Mechagodzilla, only to get knocked back by a blue beam. Mechagodzilla sees this, and Nick realizes that Godzilla is here, but when he turns around, is shocked at the sight approaching him. Godzilla, with Mothra on his back, who spreads her wings. Soon Rodan shows up, who is followed by a 4th Titan, Behemoth. Behemoth is a large Titan that bears much resemblance to a mammoth, with 4 legs and large tusks. The 4 Titans move up alongside Mechagodzilla as they intend to help defeat Destoroyah. Destoroyah sees the Titans preparing to fight it and attempts to roar at them, but its roar is halted when Destoroyah hears 2 more roars to its right. Destoroyah looks to see Zilla and Kong have also arrived to assist in the fight. Destoroyah realizes it's completely surrounded, but instead of retreating, stands its ground and roars at the Titans about to advance on it. As all the Titans square up for this battle, Godzilla lets out a roar as if he's signaling the Titans to attack, which they do. The Titans charge at Destoroyah with Godzilla and Mechagodzilla as the leaders, and together they attack Destoroyah. One by one, the Titans attack Destoroyah with their powers, Godzilla and Zilla with their atomic breath, Mothra with her antenna beams, Kong with his fists, and Behemoth with his tusks. Despite this, Destoroyah puts up fierce resistance against the Titans crashing down on it, and manages to cause some injuries with its micro-oxygen beam. But Kong runs up, jumps, and punches Destoroyah to the ground. Kong pins Destoroyah to the ground and starts punching it in the face with intense anger. But Kong soon notices that his punches aren't actually doing any damage. Destoroyah roars at Kong and uses its tail to stab Kong in the chest. Kong roars in pain, and Destoroyah uses its tail to keep stabbing Kong, which eventually causes him to fall on his back. Destoroyah gets up and starts stomping on Kong's chest, and Kong is in so much pain from the repeated stabs that all he can do is watch as Destoroyah slowly seals his fate. Destoroyah slices at Kong's chest, leaving a large amount of open wounds, and soon Kong closes his eyes and falls quiet. Destoroyah then does something unthinkable and charges up its horn and takes a slash at Kong. Mechagodzilla gets back to its feet and turns to face Destoroyah, but stops. Nick looks to see Destoroyah standing and holding a dead Kong by the head. The scene doesn't show this, but it implies that Destoroyah is actually holding Kong's decapitated head. Destoroyah throws Kong away and roars at Mechagodzilla. Nick then gets furious at the sight, so he and a few other Titans get up and charge at Destoroyah. Godzilla charges but gets tail-whacked and blasted by a micro-oxygen beam. Zilla jumps at Destoroyah, but Destoroyah knocks him to the ground, picks him up by the tail, and throws him into Mechagodzilla, knocking them both to the ground. Mothra tries to attack Destoroyah, but it only grabs her and throws her into a mountain. Behemoth takes his chance to fight Destoroyah and manages to push it to the ground. Destoroyah grabs one of Behemoth's tusks, rips it off, and jams it into Behemoth's head. Behemoth falls to the ground, but when he tries to get back up, Destoroyah starts pummeling him to death. Destoroyah turns to see Zilla trying to get back up, so it pulls the tusk out of Behemoth's head and uses it to stab Zilla in the side. Zilla roars in pain. And from a distance, his cry is heard by KJ, who starts rushing over to help her father. The tides start turning against the Titans as Destoroyah uses its overwhelming strength and power to fight off the Titans. After pushing back Mechagodzilla, Destoroyah gets attacked by Mothra, but it simply knocks her to the ground and starts charging up its horn. Mothra tries to fly up, but Destoroyah steps on her wing to hold her down and continues charging up its horn. Godzilla gets up to see Destoroyah about to kill Mothra, so he begins charging at Destoroyah to stop it. Destoroyah finishes charging up its horn, but just before it kills Mothra, it turns around and slashes at Godzilla's chest, leaving a huge open wound. Godzilla roars in pain. And then Destoroyah fires its micro-oxygen beam into the wound. The beam tears right through Godzilla's body and exits out his back. Godzilla falls to his knees and hands, and in one last attempt to fight, jumps at Destoroyah only to get hit to the ground. Nick screams, "No!" at the sight of the king being struck down, and Mothra lets out a cry that has visible shock and sadness in it. Destoroyah steps on Godzilla and charges up its horn with the intention of decapitating Godzilla. Mechagodzilla manages to get up and, using its jet boosters, flies at Destoroyah and tackles it to the ground. Mechagodzilla starts stabbing Destoroyah with its blades. Mothra crawls onto Godzilla's back to check if he's alive, which he is, but Mothra realizes that he's dying. Mothra closes her eyes and opens them to show anger in her face. Destoroyah fights Mechagodzilla, and during their confrontation, Destoroyah jams its horn into Mechagodzilla's head, which causes Nick to fly back and knocking him about. Without a pilot, Mechagodzilla is disabled, so Destoroyah takes the opportunity to knock the Metal King to the ground, but before it can finish Mechagodzilla, Destoroyah hears Mothra roar and turns around to see her glowing. Mothra flies up and starts heading towards Destoroyah, and Destoroyah starts charging up its micro-oxygen beam. Mothra is intending to allow Destoroyah to vaporize her so she can sacrifice herself and drop the ashes onto Godzilla to give him the energy to heal and win the fight. Mothra flies at Destoroyah and braces for the inevitable, but Destoroyah suddenly cancels its micro-oxygen attack, and Mothra realizes that she has just fallen into a trap. Destoroyah knew Mothra was trying to trick it and knew something was going to happen. Destoroyah didn't know what would happen, but knew something would happen. Mothra tries to fly back, but Destoroyah grabs her and throws her into a mountain. Mothra first tries to fly away, but Destoroyah pins her down and starts punching her. Rodan flies in to help Mothra, but Destoroyah manages to grab him by the neck. Rodan fires a fireball at Destoroyah, and the fireball hits Destoroyah in the head, and in response, Destoroyah bites into Rodan's neck. Rodan screams in pain. And Destoroyah then rips out Rodan's throat, and after roaring at Rodan's near lifeless body, throws him and blasts Rodan with a micro-oxygen beam. The beam tears right through Rodan's chest and throws him back, and Rodan's body lands on Godzilla, who by now has completely fallen silent. Rodan slowly dies, but as he passes, the magma leaking from his wings makes its way into Godzilla's body and starts burning away all the micro-oxygen in Godzilla's body. As Rodan finally dies, Godzilla's silent hand slightly moves a finger. Seeing Rodan die, Mothra uses her stinger to stab Destoroyah and paralyze it, and Destoroyah stops. Mothra, for an unknown reason, shows signs of fear on her face, while Destoroyah shows signs of anger and confidence. The scene pans out to show that Destoroyah actually caught the stinger before it could stab it. Destoroyah roars at Mothra and rips off the stinger. And Mothra roars in pain. Mothra then tries to fire her antenna beams, but Destoroyah hits her on the head, which almost knocks her out. Mothra drops to the ground after the blow against her head, and to finish her off, Destoroyah grabs Mothra by the neck and holds her up with the intention of strangling her to death. Mothra starts choking and tries to fight Destoroyah away, but it doesn't work, and she slowly starts slowing down from no air. Back inside of Mechagodzilla, Nick wakes up after previously being knocked out and finds himself in an excruciating amount of pain. Nick gets up only to fall back down, and after checking to see where the pain is coming from, sees that his left leg is broken. This is because when Destoroyah jammed its horn into Mechagodzilla, there was an explosion that sent debris flying everywhere. One of the large pieces of debris broke Nick's leg when he was thrown back. Nick uses some nearby materials to craft a makeshift cast for his leg, and then attempts to get back to the command station of Mechagodzilla to continue the fight. Nick, however, falls again from the pain and shock and almost decides to just sit there and rest until he hears Mothra's cries. Mothra is slowly running out of oxygen, and Nick, hearing her, manages to crawl his way back to the command station and reactivates Mechagodzilla. Back with Destoroyah, Mothra is almost out of air and is about to pass out. However, just before she does, a slice sound is heard, and Destoroyah roars in pain. After which, it drops Mothra. Mothra regains air and looks up to see a blade sticking through Destoroyah's chest. Mothra then sees Mechagodzilla standing behind Destoroyah and sees that's where the blade came from. Nick, with visible anger in his face, sees that Destoroyah is trying to pull the blade out, so Nick activates the electricity, and Destoroyah starts getting electrocuted. Mechagodzilla starts slowly lifting Destoroyah off the ground, and with all its strength, throws Destoroyah away from Mothra. Nick is about to move and fight Destoroyah, but gets distracted when he hears Mothra moaning in pain. Nick is disheartened by the sight of Mothra in pain, but what Nick doesn't know is he's just made a big mistake. As Mechagodzilla is distracted, Destoroyah gets back up and grabs it. Mechagodzilla turns around to fight and starts swinging at Destoroyah with its blades, but Destoroyah manages to dodge it. During their fight, Destoroyah grabs Mechagodzilla's left arm, and after punching Mechagodzilla in the face, uses its horn to slice off Mechagodzilla's left arm. Destoroyah takes the arm and hits Mechagodzilla with it, causing the robot to fall to the ground. Destoroyah once again approaches Mothra and starts charging up its micro-oxygen beam to finish off the queen. Mothra closes her eyes as she prepares to die, but as Destoroyah finishes charging up, two hands grab Destoroyah by the head and snaps Destoroyah's neck. These hands then grab Destoroyah's tail and throws it away from Mothra. The mysterious creature is revealed to be Godzilla, who has fully healed and is now ready to go round 2 with Destoroyah. Destoroyah gets back up and its head twists back into place. After that, it roars at Godzilla and the two square up. Godzilla charges at Destoroyah, and Destoroyah flies at the king, only to get knocked to the ground by a tail whack. Godzilla attempts to stomp on Destoroyah's head, but Destoroyah dodges the attack and gets back up. The two titans engage in a hand-to-hand fight, and Godzilla starts gaining the advantage. Destoroyah fires a micro-oxygen beam at Godzilla, which knocks him back, and in response, Godzilla starts charging an atomic breath attack. Inside of Mechagodzilla, Nick is trying to get the robot back up, but when he looks forward, he notices that Godzilla's spines are turning red instead of blue. Nick realizes that Godzilla is charging up for a powerful attack, and as Godzilla fully charges up, he mutters for Godzilla to kill him. Godzilla fires an atomic breath blast that is red in color instead of the conventional blue. This attack is called the Red Spiral Ray, which is a version of the atomic breath that is red and is much more powerful than the blue atomic breath. The beam strikes Destoroyah back and burns it heavily. Godzilla continues firing his new attack at Destoroyah, and soon he gets joined by Zilla, who fires his own green atomic breath at Destoroyah. As the two fire at Destoroyah, Zilla stops when he hears a sound behind him and sees KJ has arrived. Zilla is shocked to see her here because he previously hid her to keep her safe. Zilla turns around to approach his daughter, but takes one last look at Destoroyah and sees that Destoroyah has noticed KJ. Zilla rushes to get to KJ, but Destoroyah gets a malicious idea. Destoroyah flies in the sky and blasts Godzilla with a micro-oxygen beam, which knocks the king back. Destoroyah flies forward and uses its tail to grab Godzilla by the neck and slams him into a mountain. After that, Destoroyah turns its eyes to KJ. As Zilla gets close to KJ, Destoroyah flies in and knocks Zilla to the ground. It then turns on KJ. KJ attempts to run away, but Destoroyah grabs her and holds her up. KJ tries to fight back by biting and clawing Destoroyah, but this does nothing, and Destoroyah hits her on the head. Destoroyah then flies straight up in the sky, and Zilla roars as KJ cries for him. Godzilla gets up and tries to shoot Destoroyah down, but Destoroyah looks down and hits Godzilla with a micro-oxygen blast, which hits Godzilla in the side of the mouth and knocks him down. Nick manages to get Mechagodzilla back online and flies up to chase Destoroyah because he wants to help KJ. Destoroyah flies up with KJ in its hands, and after flying to a yet unknown height, holds out KJ. Destoroyah is intending to drop her to her death. Destoroyah enjoys causing pain and knows killing her will hurt Zilla, not physically, but emotionally. As Destoroyah is about to drop KJ, Mechagodzilla flies in and prevents Destoroyah from dropping her. The two titans fight in the air, and during the struggle, Mechagodzilla manages to snatch KJ away, even though Mechagodzilla only has one arm now. Destoroyah then flies up into the clouds, and Mechagodzilla tries to shoot it down by hitting its wings with the rainbow beam, but Mechagodzilla misses, and Destoroyah disappears in the clouds. Nick first checks the radar to see where Destoroyah is, but gets no assistance since the radar is heavily damaged. Nick also notices that he is 20 miles above the ground, meaning if either he or KJ were to fall, they would not survive. Mechagodzilla starts to slowly descend back to the ground as it continues searching for Destoroyah. As Mechagodzilla continues going down, Destoroyah emerges from the clouds right behind Mechagodzilla. Destoroyah grabs the robot, bites into its neck, and fires a micro-oxygen beam into the robot. Destoroyah then hits Mechagodzilla away, and Mechagodzilla is heavily damaged by the blast, and its jet boosters even start malfunctioning. Nick manages to keep Mechagodzilla flying and preparing to fly away from Destoroyah, but looks and sees that Mechagodzilla is no longer holding KJ. Nick becomes horrified, thinking he may have accidentally dropped her during the struggle, but he hears a sound in front of him and looks to see Destoroyah holding KJ. Mechagodzilla flies towards Destoroyah to save KJ, but Destoroyah holds Mechagodzilla back. Mechagodzilla looks at KJ and then looks back at Destoroyah. Nick disheartenedly mutters, "Don't." And right as he says this, Destoroyah drops KJ. Nick looks on in horror as KJ falls into the clouds and is heartbroken to hear her cries of pain and sadness. Mechagodzilla looks back up at Destoroyah, and Destoroyah punches Mechagodzilla down. As Mechagodzilla falls, it fires a last blast of the rainbow beam at Destoroyah. Destoroyah ducks to avoid the beam, but the beam actually slices up its wings, causing Destoroyah to start falling too. Nick attempts to activate the jet boosters to slow his fall, but the boosters malfunction, much to Nick's dismay. Nick then fires the rainbow beam and the maser cannons on Mechagodzilla's shoulders, hoping this will slow down the fall. Mechagodzilla gets closer and closer to the ground, but Nick realizes that he's about to crash into the ocean. Just before crashing into the ocean, Nick closes his eyes, believing that he will not survive the fall, and then crashes into the ocean. Miraculously, though, Nick survives and uses Mechagodzilla to walk back to shore. As Nick gets to land, he hears Zilla roaring and realizes why he is roaring. Zilla is calling out for KJ. Zilla searches desperately for his daughter, but can't find her or hear her anywhere, and he starts to cry, thinking he just lost his daughter. Suddenly, Mothra calls out, and all the remaining Titans, Godzilla, Mechagodzilla, and Zilla, approach her. Mothra lifts one of her wings to reveal KJ, wounded but alive. What happened was, Mothra flew up to assist Mechagodzilla, but on her journey up, she saw KJ plummeting to the ground and decided to save her. Mothra flew down and caught KJ before she crashed into the ground. Zilla is relieved to see KJ alive and approaches her to comfort her. The reunion is cut short when a sound is heard, and when the Titans look up, they see Destoroyah falling in the distance. Destoroyah crashes into the ground, which causes a huge shockwave. Wanting to finish this once and for all, Godzilla, Mechagodzilla, and Zilla start walking to where Destoroyah landed. The trio arrives only to find Destoroyah gone, much to their confusion. They look around to find Destoroyah but see nothing. Nick is puzzled by this since a creature like Destoroyah could not just disappear without a trace like that. Just then, Nick notices the radar come back online, and when he looks at it, he sees that there are what looks like thousands of creatures approaching them. Nick is confused by this and first thinks that the radar is broken, but then thinks again and realizes the truth, to which he says, "Aw, sh*." At that moment, thousands of aggregates emerge from the trees and start swarming the three titans. Destoroyah has broken off into thousands of aggregates and intends to absorb energy from the titans, regrow into the earlier form, and then defeat them. The aggregates swarm the three titans and then bite into them, mainly Godzilla and Zilla, and start draining their energy. The aggregates try to bite into Mechagodzilla, but are unsuccessful since Mechagodzilla is not a biological being. Mechagodzilla pulls out its electric blade and puts it on his body, which spreads electricity across the entire body and knocks off aggregates. Zilla attempts to use his shield power, but is unable to do this because his energy is slowly being drained, and he falls to the ground. In the distance, a cry from Mothra is heard and shows that she and KJ are getting besieged by aggregates. Mothra gets in front of KJ and squares up against the swarm of aggregates, intending to fight them and protect KJ. Mothra fights the aggregates and kills several with her claws and antenna beams, but soon she starts getting overwhelmed by the army of creatures attacking her. One of the aggregates jumps onto Mothra's back and starts draining her energy, leaving her weak. As the aggregates are about to swarm Mothra, a green beam kills the aggregate on top of Mothra and some of the ones in front of her. Mothra looks down to see KJ with bright spines and realizes that she was the one who fired the beam. Together, Mothra and KJ fight off the aggregates and start pushing them back. Back with Godzilla, Mechagodzilla, and Zilla, the aggregates show no sign of stopping, and Mechagodzilla looks over to see Godzilla charging up. Nick realizes that Godzilla is about to unleash an atomic pulse, but at the moment he realizes this, it's too late to react, and Godzilla unleashes the pulse attack. The attack knocks Mechagodzilla and Zilla back and vaporizes all the aggregates in the area. Back with Mothra and KJ, the two continue fighting the endless number of aggregates, but when they start to overwhelm the two, Godzilla and Zilla arrive to defeat the hordes and kill all the aggregates. All the titans calm down as the battle seems to be over, and Nick takes a breather. Zilla and KJ reunite, and Nick finds the sight heartwarming until he hears a sound and sees his radar has come back on, and it shows a mysterious figure in the distance. Nick turns around to see this unknown figure, and a look of shock washes over his face. A being rises up, and after metamorphosing, turns into Destoroyah, who regrows its wings. Not all the aggregates were killed, and a large portion of them regrouped and combined to turn back into Destoroyah. Mothra looks up and sees Destoroyah. She roars at the other titans as if she's warning them, and when they turn around, Destoroyah roars at them. The monsters once again begin fighting Destoroyah, but this time, Destoroyah gains the upper hand. Destoroyah grabs Zilla by the tail and slams him into a mountain. When Godzilla attempts to use his red spiral ray, Destoroyah dodges the beam and slices at Godzilla with its horn, causing a lot of pain. Mechagodzilla fights hard, but is unable to gain the upper hand against Destoroyah. Eventually, Destoroyah gets Godzilla to the ground and he lands next to Mothra and KJ. And then Destoroyah knocks Mechagodzilla to its knees. Nick by now is exhausted from the long battle and takes a look at the downed titans, Godzilla, Mothra, and KJ, whom Mothra has been protecting, and shows the empathy he has for these creatures. Destoroyah lands in front of them and roars. Mechagodzilla stands up and pulls out its serrated blade. Before Mechagodzilla fights a last-stand fight against Destoroyah, Nick yells, "I won't let you hurt them!" Mechagodzilla starts swinging its blade at Destoroyah, but Destoroyah simply backs away to dodge them and eventually headbutts Mechagodzilla into a mountain. Mechagodzilla tries to get back up, only to get picked up by Destoroyah and then thrown through the mountain. Destoroyah starts pummeling Mechagodzilla, and then Mechagodzilla takes one last attempt to fight back. Mechagodzilla fires a grappling wire at Destoroyah, which pulls it in, and when Destoroyah is close, Mechagodzilla slices at Destoroyah's throat, cutting it open. Destoroyah backs away in pain, and Mechagodzilla takes the opportunity to get back up and charge up the rainbow beam. Mechagodzilla is intending to fire the beam through the open wound in Destoroyah's neck. Mechagodzilla takes aim, but can't hit the open wound because Destoroyah is covering it up with its arm. As Destoroyah backs away, Zilla jumps on its back and bites down on Destoroyah. Destoroyah tries to get Zilla off of it, but in doing so, leaves the wound open for Mechagodzilla. Mechagodzilla fires the beam at Destoroyah's neck, and the beam tears right through it. Destoroyah kneels down and gets kicked to the ground by Mechagodzilla, who starts stomping on Destoroyah's chest. Destoroyah flies up and starts getting blasted by the other titans. Destoroyah realizes that it will not win the fight and attempts to fall back and regenerate. Mechagodzilla, however, won't let it leave, and when Destoroyah tries to fly away, the Metal King blasts Destoroyah's wings, which knocks it to the ground. Nick then activates two features, grappling wires and another weapon, the Absolute Zero Cannon. The reason Nick didn't use the Absolute Zero earlier is that the weapon takes 20 seconds to fully charge, and with Destoroyah constantly moving, it would be hard to hit it. Also, the weapon uses up almost all of Mechagodzilla's energy, so if Nick missed, Mechagodzilla would barely have enough energy left to fight. The wires pull Destoroyah in and pins it to Mechagodzilla. Destoroyah tries to pull itself away from Mechagodzilla, but when it turns around, it sees Godzilla, Zilla, and Mothra, who is on Godzilla's back. Mothra roars, and the three monsters fire their beam attacks at Destoroyah's back to prevent it from escaping. As the weapon charges up, Nick starts thinking about memories in his life, since there's a possibility that the weapon could kill him. Destoroyah then tries to lift itself off of its body, but Mechagodzilla uses its blade to hold Destoroyah down. Back with Mark, Chen, and Madison, who have run from the battle to get somewhere safe, Mark calls in some Ospreys to extract the trio from the island, and they get distracted by a bright light in the distance. They begin questioning what the glow is coming from, and then they realize it's from the Absolute Zero. The Absolute Zero fully charges, and Nick prepares to shoot the cannon, but just before he presses the trigger, he takes one last look at the Titans and says, "This is for you, both of you," and fires the gun. Nick is talking about his parents, Steve and Audrey, when he says, "both of you." The cannon's beam tears right through Destoroyah and creates a blinding light. The shockwave from the blast knocks Godzilla, Zilla, and Mothra to the ground. Meanwhile, Mark, Chen, and Madison look away from the light because of its immense brightness. The blast blankets all of Skull Island with a winter-like weather, and the Titans get back up to see if the gun worked. The scene then shows Mechagodzilla and Destoroyah's frozen body that's missing the top of its torso. Mechagodzilla, having used up all of its power to fire the Absolute Zero, shuts down with its eyes going colorless, and then falls forward. Mechagodzilla crashes through Destoroyah's frozen body, and the body completely vaporizes as Mechagodzilla lands on the ground. The Titans walk up and are about to mourn the loss of their robotic companion until they hear a sound. The scene shows Destoroyah, who managed to separate itself from its body, attempting to crawl away. Despite Mechagodzilla's efforts, Destoroyah managed to separate itself from its body before the Absolute Zero was fired. Destoroyah is now just half of a torso, with a single arm and a head, while the body it broke away from is completely frozen. Godzilla walks up to Destoroyah, picks it up, and roars at it. Godzilla starts slamming Destoroyah onto the ground, and then throws it up in the sky, after which he fires his red spiral ray at Destoroyah, sending it soaring in the air. The beam starts tearing through Destoroyah, who starts glowing from the beam. Destoroyah lets out one last roar, and then explodes from the red spiral ray. With the nightmare finally over, and Destoroyah finally dead, Godzilla lets out a victory roar in the air. Zilla finally reunites with KJ while Godzilla and Mothra calm down. KJ crawls onto Zilla's back to rest, and Zilla roars at Godzilla as if telling him that he and KJ are leaving, which they do. As Godzilla and Mothra rest, Mothra hears a metallic sound from an unknown location. Meanwhile, with Mark, Chen, and Madison, the Ospreys arrive to pick them up. Chen suggests they should go back and search for Nick to see if he's still alive, but as she says this, Mothra flies in. Everyone notices that Mothra's claws are curled up as if she's carrying something. Mothra lowers her claws and drops something, which is revealed to be Nick, who is still alive. The metallic sound Mothra heard earlier was the sound of Nick opening a door to exit Mechagodzilla. She saw him and, wanting to help, picked him up and flew him to the others. Everyone is surprised to see him alive, but when they rush over to help him, he raises his hand and motions them to stop. Nick limps over to Mothra and hugs her as a sign of gratitude, and then Nick walks over to everyone who help him get on the Osprey. Mothra then flies off as the Ospreys take off, and everyone watches her fly away. The scene cuts to Godzilla entering the ocean, and then Mothra, who is still wounded, landing on Godzilla's back to rest. As the two head out to sea, Godzilla stops, turns around, and lets out a final roar. The screen cuts to black, and the movie ends, and thus concludes the Godzilla Monsterverse. And that was Destroy All Monsters. I honestly don't really know what to say. It's probably my best story, and it's definitely my longest out of all of them. It has its sad moments, but it also has its heartwarming parts too, and that's what I think makes it great. Before I go, I would just like to say thank you for listening to my stories, and I hope you enjoyed my Monsterverse series. Until next time, peace out.